What's going on, workforce? Brian and Chris here, and today we're sitting down talking about whether you should alt or not. And this is essentially focused around new players coming into the game and playing today. We have a couple. I think it's a gray area. I think this is going to be a topic with a little bit of nuance. But Chris, you kind of started in with your thoughts. What do you got going on? Let's plug something, and then let's get into the conversation.
We have Lucron coming on the podcast this Thursday, filming live over on Twitch, and then of course that'll get broken up into parts and pushed out to all the places. So you can listen to it anywhere you get podcasts, as well as the parts come out on Work to Game, and then the whole thing comes out on Ginger Gaming Radio. It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Just search Crystal Core Radio. You'll be good to go wherever podcasts are found. And yeah, I'm really excited to have Lucron back on. I think Mioni's the following week. And then I've got a couple of guests lined up that we're not ready to necessarily reveal with shock and awe yet. So hopefully you guys look forward to that in the podcast as we dive into, literally September. We're almost here. This is where we're going to get live letters. This is where we're going to start to really get the battle system changes. And I think that's why this is a really good topic for us to kind of break down and discuss. So Chris, why don't you start? What is, should a new player, what's the concept of alts? Because they're probably coming from WoW. They're probably coming from another game where alts, I've heard altaholic being kind of a term thrown around. That's something that I think is baked into the core of the game. Why is Final Fantasy XIV different, and what should they look out for?
So with very rare exception, you can do everything you want to do on one character, at least once. Now, where alts come into play in most games is that characters are forced to make choices. So in many games, you're forced to choose what class you play, and you can't play all the classes on one character. That's a reason that you would want to have an alt in other games so that you can play a different class. Sometimes there are times that you have to make choices in a character's path narratively, or something like that. That affects the world. Incredibly common in single player games where player agency can be a lot stronger than it can in a shared space. So to re-experience the narrative, until we had New Game Plus, creating an alt was the only way to do that. Roleplay, anything where you're starting to expand on the narrative of a character beyond what the gameplay mechanics can do. You may want a character that exists in a different space for you, either because it's a different race and whatever, or because you have two identical characters that you just want to play differently. Roleplay creates a huge sandbox element. So there are times, but for the vast majority of players, that is the case. Now, where this starts to be an exception is veteran players that are starting to now talk about things like weekly lockouts, daily lockouts, things like that, where you're starting to want to run content that they've intentionally time gated to say, you cannot get raid loot faster than this pace. And they're like, but I want a piece from my white mage and a piece from my tank. Is that a problem? No, as long as those exist on different characters.
Right. And that's where I think one of the things I've seen, and my main first concern is when I talk to new players all the time, is that there's a lot of really cool things that this game can distract you with. Typically, we see this as what we call what are the walls in the game. And with a Realm Reborn, what we see just thematically in the comments, what we see posted on Reddit and on Twitter, overall 30 to 50 is kind of this gap, right? And then essentially the ARR to Heaven's Word can be another gap. Depending on your type of play style, this is either a non-issue and you'll never experience what I'm talking about, or when you hit that, hopefully these words will resonate. My usual fear is that when somebody gets caught in one of those walls, that's when they decide to go do something else, which is not naturally a bad idea. Hey, this is kind of getting a little grindy. Maybe I'll go change it up. But what we end up seeing is hey, somebody got all of their jobs to level 32, and that is the highest they've ever gotten. And that is essentially the struggle. That same issue can exist within the alt mentality. However, I have talked to many players who, based off of whether it's previous MMOs or the theme of the job that they're playing, they want it to relate to the race that they're playing. And for me personally speaking, I have definitely, I have got lots of alts. Whenever you see me log in to this game, I've got plenty of alts, but that doesn't mean that they're all there for progression or story. Typically, they've usually been when playing with a friend and just trying to help them out so I can actually be where they are, or doing a guide for either Work to Game or Ginger Prime in this regards. I think if you're used to alts, stick with that theme of what your class and character say about you. You're going to get the bonus of the story and kind of helping drive you forward. And if you're not interested in watching the story again, you can play like Chris did for the first couple of expansions and automatically hit that escape key. There's nothing wrong with it. You still have New Game Plus. Plus, you've already seen it on your main story. But the same pitfalls are going to still exist to bite you. If you get to level 30 or level 40 in the story and you never unlock your first raid, if you never get to 50 and really start to see what it's all about, you're going to struggle. Plus, you're going to lose out on all the bonuses that the game naturally bakes into that leveling experience, like having the increased experience bonus because you're playing a job that's under your current level, not being able to take advantage of flying or your mount or all the little quality of life features. So if you're somebody whose mindset is set to, I want an alt because of how I theme it, and I do plan on playing like 3 jobs, nothing wrong with it. Just note that what it's going to cost you in the short term can tend to kind of be a little bit frustrating. So it is important that you still push past those barriers, those walls, so you don't find yourself caught in that limbo that catches several players and then maybe we get them back. And that's, right. You know, and that's usually where my concern is rooted, is in terms of somebody leaving the game because, yeah, the first 30 levels, no matter, like you did it on 17 jobs on, you know, right. 8 characters, like, yeah, like that's going to feel very samey. I can't help you.
I'm trying to level up the rest of mine now, and I have like 4 jobs at level 37. And so the most effective thing I can do outside of roulettes or Palace of the Dead is spam the highest level dungeon, but they all share that dungeon. And so if I wanted to level them all to 38 at the same time, I would spam that dungeon until one hit 38, and then I would change jobs and I would spam it again until 38, and then I would spam it again and I'd spam it again. I have another job at 40, so then it jumps to being 5 jobs worth of. And even if that dungeon is only, let's say, 2 times per level, because with rested experience, that's about right, 2-3 times. If I have 5 jobs, I'm going to run that dungeon 10 times in a row. And so then I come out the other end and I'm like, I put all this time into the game. I tried a bunch of jobs and it's just not for me. It's really repetitive. But like what made it repetitive is me. That's why when people ask about crafting and gathering, my suggestion is, first of all, get done with MSQ. There's a lot of things like Peace Tribes, Discard Restoration. There's all these pieces of content for your crafters that are tied behind progressing your MSQ. So you want that done first. But I tell people, level 1 crafter all the way to cap, just to decide if you even like crafting and gap. Like, just, do you even like crafting? Get 1 to cap. Once you've got 1 to cap, now go level the other 7 simultaneously, because there's a ton of advantages to leveling things simultaneously. Yeah. The concern is if you don't do that first step, that inefficient get 1 to cap, you don't get the big picture, and then you're just kind of slammed into rinse repeat until you're like, well, I only saw 10% of the game, but I saw that 10% 27 times, and I found that really boring.
Yeah. So I'm gonna shift to talk about the benefits of alts in this regards, because like you bring up a really good point. Especially with getting to cap, because that's the default go-to mantra that you and I have, because we feel it serves the vast majority of players who tend to get caught into these no man zones. But when you think about cap in my mind is set to 50, 60, 70, 80, and eventually 90. Like there are these milestone caps in that regards. One of the benefits of having multiple alts is you just kind of listed it. If you're in the raid scene, if you want to make sure that you have a tank, a healer, and some form of DPS, and that can kind of multiply by another 2, because we have technically 3 roles for the DPS: ranged, magical, and melee. And so with the different categories, and even within those categories, sometimes different gear sets enough itself applies. Literally, guys, there's enough content in Final Fantasy XIV that can consume you for the next 10 years without even blinking, especially if you're new here. Start with that free trial. Link is in the description. We don't get any money for it. We just love the game and we want you to check it out. All right. Especially if you're already into a 9-minute video so far. If that's the pitch that gets you, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to know if that's the one that got you to click the link and sign up. All right. So obviously having alts in that regards, but now you got retainers. That's another thing that you actually have. By default, just your normal subscription, you get 2 retainers per character. So if you wanted to play around with the game in the market, that is another area in which that you could go, and your retainers tying to the jobs that you have leveled on that character could end up being a really good, easy source of going out and collecting items for you to sell on the market. Here's the struggle though. Like you're going to need to go free company with your multi-characters to be able to really easily access that shared bank for your free company. There is a trick with PlayStation players. Like you got to have the PlayStation license and you got to sign in and out real quick, and you could technically friend yourself. But outside of like that weird hack that like I don't see a lot of people talking about, at the end of the day, like you want to make sure that your characters in free companies, so that way a free company, so you can easily trade and share your materials, because you're not going to have that. They don't want, I guess, those muling is what you would be coming from Final Fantasy XI, be calling it, and alting if you're coming from any other MMO, to be able to share those resources on those characters. So you have multiple characters, you got multiple retainers, you can actually, like, without paying anything additional, you can actually have them going out and collecting additional items, trying to control more market share and more. The question I have to you, Chris, I know that mowing is going on in the background where you are at. The question I have for you is this, is that when it comes to crafting a gathering, like, would an alt be best served for the battling and only, or is there a value in actually having an alt that has different kind of crafting? Because they did get rid of the Omnicrafter.
Honestly, I think that you should just level what is fun. As somebody who is traditionally focused on just one main battle job in any MMO, and then done crafting to the point that it was fun, what I would suggest, rather than focusing on like optimizing and what is the correct path, is just make sure you're still having fun. If at any point it starts to be not fun, then it's a question of why you're doing it. And this game has had requirements in the past, such as cross-class skills and like unlocking certain things by leveling up other ones. And they've gotten all rid of a lot of those. Omnicrafter used to be something that was necessary to truly understand all of crafting. They've gotten rid of that. So like they've over time tried to strip out where there isn't ever like one fun system, but to get to that system, you have to do these 10 other systems. And so they're like, look, those 10 systems all have great engagement. Like, if you're doing it in 14, it's because you like it. And if you don't like it, stop doing it. There's very little raid prep week to week. There's very little need to ever touch PvP. There's very little need to touch crafting and gathering at all. Leveling multiple battle jobs, while it does help make you more resilient against, like, they change the job you like now in Endwalker, and then you have somewhere to go outside of like resiliency in your own account. You could just wait, and if like you could just take that chance. And if they change your job to something that it feels different, and you don't like it, well, then cross that bridge when you get there. You never have to do anything in 14 outside of MSQ. And that's why the one group of people, the people who like things about MMOs but don't like narrative in an MMO, but there is really fun battle content, there are really fun systems in 14. That's the only group that I'm like, hey, I got bad news for you. Everybody else, don't do it. Oh, I could never do Savage. Then don't. Like, I could never heal. Then don't. So Brian and I are happy to help you if you're like, I want to do it and I'm afraid to. That we can deal with. But if you're like, no, I know what it is, I understand what it is, and I'm not interested, then don't. Like, that is totally fine.
Yeah, as the developers constantly say, the theme is fun. They don't want to give you any more feedback into that, because as long as you're having fun, you're doing it right. As long as you're not hurting other people and you're having fun, you're absolutely doing it right. I think there's some advantages to the alt. I think there's definitely some advantages to that style of play. But I think when you pair that with the fact that you can do everything on one character, I love especially with the queue times now, with the queue times, like logging in, logging out, like, wait a minute, I got to wait. And also chat saying that they believe they semi-patched the PlayStation exploit, but even with the queue times now, you'd never make it in to be able to take advantage of it, even if it wasn't patched out. So like, just that in and of itself, it's so convenient to be able to just click on, the gear set, and boom, you're ready to go. You're ready to play.
Super nice.
And then, like, even that's where it's like, my mindset is that once you as a player, beyond thinking of the alt, but you as a player going and saying, hey, I've hit level cap 80 and then in a Walker 90. What do I do next? And my next recommendation is look at one of the other roles. If you leveled up a DPS, then maybe try a healer if you're up for it. Maybe try a tank if you're up for it. So you have more flexibility when it comes to group makeup. Because if you're playing with friends, or if you're making new friends in the game, and somebody can because they only have one leveled up. At one point, that was all of us, right? Like, at one point, I only had white mage leveled, and it's like, well, I can only come as a white mage, guys. Sorry. But then at some point, you're like, oh, I could also come as a tank. Oh, I could also come as a caster. Like, oh, we can kind of mix and match and kind of play around with our party. So we have the best flexibility. I think that system in and of itself speaks for itself. And for me, as kind of a casually hardcore player here, call back to the old podcast name, it's like, yeah, having that ability to be capped on my tomes like once a week really isn't restrictive, because I'm not hitting that cap in the first place, because I don't bother with gearing up until the last part of the expansion anyway. And that's just where I personally fall in. Somebody who's hitting that cap within the day or two, yeah, that's where maybe consider an alt, because you're definitely going to want to take advantage of it. Any final thoughts on that one, Chris?
No, I think just to get back to the core subject was what should a new player do? And all the things we're describing here are things that you can always go back and create an alt later. For now, the key thresholds to check out the game, in my opinion, are 30, 50, 60, 70, and 80. And so if you're not checking in at those milestones, just know that each one of those milestones has a whole wave of content locked behind it. And so if you find yourself, you're like, wow, so he listed 30, 50, 60, 70, and 80. So there's 5 checkpoints. I'm only getting all my jobs to the first one. Well, there's 4 checkpoints worth of content that you're not getting to. There's all sorts of things locked behind those
soon
various
to be another
expansions. Soon to be one more at 90. So like if you find yourself not getting to all those milestones because you're busy making alts, or you're just jumping jobs, even just jumping jobs too much, try to hone in and get one. You're going to have all of this experience and tools and resources, even just literal guild, to help you level up the other ones later. So you're not saying no to them forever. You can always go back. But for now, I would just say, like, get your one character in. There is plenty to tackle, even just tasting the game. It is that big of a game that even a taste is huge. I wouldn't worry about like a super thorough first clear unless you're just wanting to do that.
Yeah, I think that says it up perfectly. Why don't you take us out, and then we'll jump into another video.
So we film all this stuff live on Twitch. So if you've made it this far and you want to catch these sort of things, we usually film on Mondays, Wednesdays, and or Fridays. Sometimes we have podcasts in between. And we stream on Twitch Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central Standard as a standard thing. But either way, you can always catch us here and on all the other channels. Brian has like 1,000. So for Chris and Brian, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Take care.